Hi, my name is Cecile Baumann and I'm your host and the founder of the company Ganz in Bewegung. I'm an Alexander Technique and movement specialist. My business serves holistic thinking people who want to improve their mind-body connection. Welcome to a conversation with Tommy Thompson, a distinguished figure in the world of the Alexander Technique. With over 49 years of experience, Tommy has dedicated his life to teaching and applying the profound principles of this transformative method. We are so excited to have him here. But before I bring him up, I want to share what I mean by mind-body connection. The Ganz in Bewegung system we developed includes 7 defining components of being human. For non-German speakers, the meaning of Ganz in Bewegung is the whole of you in motion, which includes your movement, your body, your surrounding, your experience, your emotion, your thinking, and it's all connected with your breathing and all is interconnected with each other. Tommy's journey began in the vibrant theater scene of California, where he taught drama at the University of California, Santa Barbara, before moving on to Tufts University. It was there that he crossed paths with Dr. Frank Pierce Jones, a leading authority on the Alexander Technique, who recognized Tommy's potential and encouraged him to pursue this path. Since then, Tommy has made an invaluable mark on the lives of thousands, ranging from professional and Olympic athletes to musicians, dancers, and even those grappling with chronic pain or trauma. His commitment to guiding individuals towards more fulfilling lives is evident in his diverse clientele, which includes everyone from corporate professionals to children and trauma survivors. He founded the Alexander Technique Center at Cambridge, which has been recognized for its excellence in holistic health and has served as a training ground for future teachers since 1983. An accomplished author and contributor to numerous publications, Tommy's scholarly work bridges the gap between theory and practice. His insightful writings on the intersection of the Alexander Technique, Tai Chi, and theater have inspired many within these fields. Moreover, his innovative approach during challenging times, such as launching the Gift of Our Understanding online series during the COVID pandemic, exemplifies his adaptability and dedication to sharing knowledge widely. Tommy's extensive teaching history spans 16 countries across 5 continents, making him a sought-after workshop leader who brings both depth and relatability to his sessions. His passion for nurturing potential in others has earned him multiple recognition and honors within the Alexander community. In today's fast-paced world, filled with distractions and external pressures, Tommy offers a timely perspective on our relationship with our bodies and identities. His insight challenges us to step beyond our habitual responses and embrace change through awareness. As he eloquently puts it, the Alexander Technique is about recovering the person we genuinely are rather than conforming to societal expectations. By listening to Tommy's talk, you are opening yourself up to a deeper understanding of yourself, a journey toward greater authenticity and presence. Join us as we delve into Tommy Thompson's wealth of knowledge and discover how the Alexander Technique can serve as a powerful tool for personal transformation in today's evolving landscape. Hi, Tommy. What a pleasure talking to you today.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me.
Tommy, you've been teaching the Alexander Technique since 1975. Can you
Yeah.
share what initially drew you to this practice and how your understanding of it has evolved over the decades?
Well, yeah. It's actually been over 50 years since I've been teaching. You begin to realize how old you got. Uh, um, I never intended to teach this work. Um, I left Virginia in the southern portion of the United States when I was 18 to go study acting at the Pasadena Playhouse. And I was an actor and a director, a little bit of a playwright. well, for 18 years. Some of those 18 years included teaching the technique as well. But that's all I had in mind to do. And at age 22, I was supposed to go to New York and play the lead role in a Broadway show called Dark of the Moon. The playwright had come to see me perform it at a university, but it fell through, so I had nowhere to go. And didn't know exactly what to do. And the woman who became my first wife said, I think you should go to graduate school. I said, I don't want to go to graduate school. She said, well, acting doesn't really have that much dignity to it. At least you ought to go to the graduate school. So I ended up at University of California in Santa Barbara and went to graduate school for 6 years. One of those years, I dropped out and taught for a year in Kentucky, and I came back to work on a PhD. So when I got to graduate school, they said, would you like a teaching assistantship? And I said, no, I just want to act and direct. And they said, well, it pays money. I said, I'll take the job. I had no money. I had no money. So my first class I ever taught was Hamlet, Shakespeare's Hamlet. And it really launched me. I fell in love with teaching. I really did. So after the class, I made the decision to act, direct, and teach. And I could do that by teaching in the university and going around the country and directing and acting from time to time. So that's what I did for a good while. And I had to get a job after a while. So I applied to a number of universities, and I chose Tufts University. It is a hard name to pronounce. It's a major university in Boston. And I signed on as managing director of their theater and teaching acting, directing, and dramatic lip. But while I was there that summer, I saw somebody in the green room. And the green room is the room where the actors wait to go on stage to make their entrance. And somebody was fiddling around with somebody's neck. And I said, what are you doing? They said, the Alexander technique. I said, what's that? And they said, well, you should ask Professor Frank Pierce Jones. He's the grandfather of the technique, and he studied with Alexander himself and with his brother A.R. So I filed it away. I went to California, picked up my car, drove it across the country, and I picked up the phone in my office and I called Frank. But he said, well, come over. I'll introduce you to the work. So I walked over the hill, down the hill to Frank's office, and we sat and we talked for about 2 hours. And I really liked Frank. He was everything I wasn't. He was an old school scholar. We talked about his work with two of his famous students, Aldous Huxley and John Dewey. And then he said, would you like a turn? I said, what's a turn? He says, well, I'll give you a little bit of the Alexander work, perhaps take you in and out of a chair and explain what we're doing and why. So normally when a person is introduced to the technique, with exceptions, they experience a very incredible lightness of being. And it's a very good experience. But I was 29 years old. Frank was, I think, 68 at the time. And I was solid steel, emotionally and physically. So I felt absolutely nothing from one of the world's greatest teachers.
Yeah. Oh my
And
God.
but Frank was the first person ever to put hands on me or touch me from whom I felt no threat. And I had never known I'd felt threatened until he touched me. So I was intrigued. And that's really what led me to teach. Now, 7 years later, in a meditation, I saw my birth. And the doctor was drunk, inebriated. And so the nurses pushed me back every time I crowned. They pushed me back into my mother's womb, locked my mother's legs together for an hour and a half. Every time I tried to come in, they pushed me back. because at that time, only the male doctor could deliver a baby. So then I guess he was sobered up enough, and then he did high forceps delivery up here. And I don't have as much feeling in my left hand as I do my right. He affected my cranial nerves. So the first person's hands that touched me were feminine energy. It was rejection, go back, we don't want you, and betrayal. You can't come into the planet. And the second hands that touched me were a male energy, and he hurt me. He did nerve damage. So you come into the world rejected, betrayed, and hurt by the two energies you spend the rest of your life with, but you don't know it. So for 29 years, I was defending myself against being born, against being rejected, betrayed, and hurt. And I never knew I was doing that. So it made me an angry young man. And I never understood it. Sensitive, yes, but just angry and defensive. And so I continued to work with Frank because I was interested in why I felt what I did. And then 30 years later, after my father died, I was talking to his sister, and she was present at my birth. So she corroborated everything I saw in the birth. So I know I'm not making this up. It's a reality. So I realized that in my teaching room, the story goes on and on, but I won't go into it. It's way too long. But in my teaching room, when I sat down and meditated and saw my birth, I realized that what I was doing was teaching a way of giving birth to yourself. Who am I really? I'm not an angry young man. I'm certainly not an angry old man now. And but that's when I think that's when I really decided to teach the work. But then I was teaching and I was also in theater. And we had a show that we'd written, and it was supposed to go in rehearsal off Broadway. And one night, after giving a lesson, late in the afternoon, 6, 7 o'clock, the woman told me what she was getting from the work. I said, "You're getting that from me?" And she gave a very beautiful testimonial. And I thought about it for a week. And then I asked everybody what they were getting from the work together. And it's not about me, it's about what we do together. The truth is not the Alexander technique at all. The truth is what happens between the teacher and the student. And so I asked everybody, and I got remarkably beautiful testimonials that were life-changing. And I went and sat in my teaching room again, this time to meditate. And I said, "Okay, you all guide the universe. I'm yours. I'll give you a lifetime of service with two conditions. I don't want any dark energy, and I don't want to be poor. I grew up in poverty on a tobacco farm in Virginia. I plowed behind a mule. We didn't have running water until I was 14. And so after I sat there that night, within 2 weeks, I had a 6-month waiting list. And in 2 months, I had a 2-year waiting list. I'd given up theater altogether, and I was an Alexander teacher. So it's an interesting story, which I never thought would happen. And it's been the rest of my life. So that's how I got into it. That's how I got into it.
impressive. Yeah, really. Wow. Yeah. I mean, oh, but
So
that's
I
really
was 29 when I first had my lesson with Frank,
oh,
and I'm 83 now.
okay.
So
And
it's
you
been a
did
long
a
time.
3-year course, like a 3-year education in the Alexander technique, or how did
No,
you
I
get?
didn't train the way you're supposed to at all. No, 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 no. I had to fight my way into the Alexander world. I I had no intention of teaching, none. And then Frank wanted me to meet Walter Carrington, so he came over. I met Walter in Dillis, and he wanted me to meet March Barstow. And Frank and I arranged from Don Weed wanted Marge to come to Boston to give a workshop in 1970. And so Frank and I got her a room at Tufts University. And so in 1970, I met Marjorie Barstow. I have a tape of me being worked with Marjorie doing Tai Chi. And people were there. Buzz Gumry was there. So many people in the technique were there for that work. So I met a lot of people. And we were supposed to stand in line. And Don Weed was slumped like that. And we were supposed to go take him out of a guided slump. But it wasn't real. It was fake. And I'm standing in line, standing in queue, waiting for my turn to take him out of the guided slump. But I didn't really want to do it because it wasn't real. And it's my turn, and I'm standing there, and everybody's waiting for me to go over and take him out of the slump. And I'm not moving. And people are looking at each other. And Frank from across the room said in his baritone voice, he said, "You can work with me. You can work on me." Nobody works on Frank. But he saw what I was doing, recognized why I wasn't working with Don, and said, "Come work with me." So I walked over and I stood behind Frank, and my hands were actually shaking because I was going to put my hands on Frank Jones. And I did. I gave him what I thought to be a lesson, or a bit of a lesson. And people said, "What are his hands like?" And Frank said, "Well, they're light. They're light." So that weekend, my wife, my second wife, Julie, we were together for 34 years. She said, Helen Jones called, Frank's wife, and you've been invited to join an interesting training group. Frank was interested in starting a training course in the psychology department at Tufts. And he was choosing people that were working with him to be his first students. So he invited me to join that. And I can't remember how many times, because I still wasn't interested in teaching. But let's just say 6 times. And but then he had to stop because he was diagnosed with brain cancer.
Oh my God.
So he stopped. Now I had arranged for Frank to teach, a teach assistant for the USA Olympic rowing team. They were the world champions of rowing team, and they were defending their title in Mexico at Princeton University. And I had arranged for Frank to go and teach. He says, "I can't go, but I give you my blessing to go and teach." So he sent me out into the world as an Alexander teacher to work with the rowing team. So I worked with them that year. And then I worked with them the following year when they became Olympic rowers, when they raced in the 1976 Olympics. And but when I came back to visit Frank after his second brain operation, he was lying in bed and he was doing this with the lapel of his pajamas. Just that. And I stood at the doorway, and then he saw me and his big smile. And I said, wait. What are you doing? He says, "I need a reference point for inhibition. I need something that cues me into a reasonable necessity for monitoring how I'm using myself at a given moment. It just doesn't come out of nowhere. There's a reason for it." And this was the reason. He could only do this because he could barely move. And then when I visited him in the UHAB rehab, I don't know how many times, it was 3, 4. he was showing me how to teach, just lying down and showing me how to use his hands. And then he said, so and so will do this. Dick Brown will carry on my research. Dick Brown was his research assistant and got his PhD and master's under Frank. And you, of course, will be my successor. I said, what? And then his voice changed. It was a voice from somewhere else. He said, I think you can do it, don't you? I said, I have no idea. So I went out and told his wife, and she said, forget it. And so that's when I started teaching. I thought about what he said for a year, and then I resigned from Tufts. So I really started teaching my own students, my drama students. And then occasional people would come in 75, but I resigned from Tufts in 76 and hung up a shingle. And then Helen and Richard Brown and I established the F. Pierce Jones, Frank Pierce Jones Archives for research at Tufts, and later the Alexandria Archives. And then a lot of things happened, and I ended up all by myself. And that's a whole other story. And I almost quit teaching because people were upset that I didn't train the 3 years that you're supposed to. I understood why, but that's just not the way it happened. It was more like an apprenticeship. And so I also resigned from the organization that I helped build with Helen and Rick at the Dick Brown. And she had asked me, Helen asked me to write the memoriam for her husband. That was a big honor. And it was for the Alexandrian with Judith Leibowitz in New York and Ron Dennis. I did that. And then Michael Frederick called. He established the first Congress in 1986 in Long Island, the university. And he said, would you give a paper on Frank Jones? Because he's the only person that's not survived. Everybody else is still living that trained with Alexander, but Frank isn't. And so I said, well, you have to ask Helen Jones, his wife. I can't just say do it. But when you ask her if Dick Brown can give a paper on the science. Frank is a scientist and his work on the Alexander work, and I will give one on the humanism of Frank Pierce Jones. And boy, I worked hard on that paper. I really did. Because that was introducing Frank through me. Mm-hmm. And Helen approved it. She loved the paper. His sons loved the paper. And but she did ask me to resign from the organization, and I did. And I said, Helen, I'm supposed to give this paper in Brighton again, the second Congress. Do you want me not to give it? And she said, no, go ahead and do it. So I gave the paper, and a little boy, 9 years old, came up and said, I really liked your paper. Mm-hmm. I went, wow, that's just what I needed to hear. It was Michael Frederick's son. Oh. And I walked out on the campus, and I looked up again. I says, okay, you guys, the guy of the universe. I spoke to you once. I can quit. I can go back into theater. I can go back as a professor at some university. I need a sign. Marie-Francois Lefaux, French teacher, ran a training course, studied with McDonald, walked up to me and said, would you give me a lesson? I said, sure. Well, I don't want to go in with the other teachers. I don't want to do that. Just stay outside in the physics quad. So we're working together. And pretty soon people will stop by. They're curious. And then pretty soon, I don't know how long it took, there were about 50 people in a circle. and a cue. I gave lessons, many lessons, for 4.5 hours.
Whoa.
And I looked up in the sky and I said, okay, I see this as a sign. You take your truth to the people, not to an organization. And I resolved to continue to teach for the rest of my life. So, and I've learned so much. A great deal of it is in my book, Touching Presence. And I'm working on one now. It's more of an autobiography. And so that's it.
Wonderful story. Wow. And you got accepted from the Alexander people someday.
Well, I didn't do a 3-year training.
Yeah, so you never
And
got a diploma or something.
yeah, I mean, a lot of people resented that. And so when NASTAT was formed, it's AMSAT,
Hmm.
um, David Gorman was really responsible for the convergence of the societies. They couldn't figure out what to do with me. And so when I applied, I'm not going to mention names now because I don't want to do that. But I brought somebody from NASTAT into the ATA, which was our society, for Helen Jones, Dick Brown, and myself. And I created I mean, I had Walter Carrington on the board. I had a lot of teachers on the board. And so when I applied, I didn't have any records of anything. Uh, and when Frank told me, he said, "Well, you'll be my successor," the only person in the world that heard that was me. So what can I say?
Yeah,
Would you sign
that's
right here? Uh, so I said, to me, having lessons during a 3-year period, because I would go on breaks. I didn't study straight through. I would go on breaks, and I said, during a 3-year period of lessons with Frank, to me, it feels like the equivalent of a training.
Mhm.
And then the people from NASTAT went to Helen and said, Tommy's claiming to have been trained by Frank. And that's not true. Um, and so she asked me to resign.
Mhm.
And then those people took over the archives. So that's and that was right before I went to the Congress in Brighton and gave the paper again. So I don't hold grudges. I mean, they thought what they thought, but I did what I did, and
Mhm.
I refused to not teach. And then things got really tough. I mean, they were trying to destroy my reputation, and that's when Marie Francois asked me to give her a lesson. And then the state of Massachusetts, I won't go into this too much because it's sordid, but a doctor and a couple of doctors and psychiatrists were abusing their women patients, and so under drugs. And so the state of Massachusetts decided to license anybody who touched anybody professionally. And so NASTAT went to the organization, I mean, to the state, and said, if you're not a member of NASTAT, you're not a legitimate teacher. Now, that would have wiped me out, and it would have wiped out people that had studied with Marjorie Barstow. It would have wiped out a number of people who were already teaching at universities and earning a living. And I just said to myself, that's the last straw. I don't want the bad guys to win. So I called two people who held a Alexander organization, nonprofit organization online on paper. I said, do you still want to start a new society? And they said, yes. I said, well, let's do it tonight. And you have to make me a member. And I will go to the state tomorrow and I will tell them about the guild. There's a long history to this too. So I did that. I went to the state the next day and I said, "You forgot an organization." "Oh, I'm sorry. What's it called?" "The Guild." "How many people are in it?" "Oh, I forget." "Me, one person." "But that's legal. That's legal." And then 28 of us got together about a month and a half later in Virginia, and we formed ATI.
Ah, that's how it came about.
And that's how ATI came into being. And then a lot of things happened. I ended up becoming the chair, not wanting to, but I became the chair the first 5 years. And I bought a computer and I bought a desk and I bought a file cabinet and put it in my office and sat there and ran it until I could no longer do it again. And I could not have done it without David Gorman.
Yeah.
David Gorman was as much a part of all this, and David died about a month ago now.
Oh,
And so that's the history.
wow, that's amazing.
And the rest was lovely when I started traveling.
Hmm.
That was really, it's been a beautiful, beautiful life in the Alexander world. It really has.
It's never getting boring, isn't it?
Well, you don't get bored. You don't get bored because you get interesting people that come in to see you,
Yeah.
and you alter lives.
Hmm.
You really did. And I mean, some are magnificent. I
Yeah,
work
we
with
have.
babies. I work with babies. I work with children. I work with everybody.
Do you have a transformative story from a
Oh,
situation?
I have so many. I mean, I have favorites. I mean, one of my favorites is absolutely my favorite. I'm in Japan teaching, and I've taught for 2 weeks for Jeremy Chance at Body Chance. And it's 9 o'clock. I mean, it's 7 o'clock, and I'll be teaching till 9 or 9:30. And I've been doing that for 2 weeks. I'm a little tired. And I was leaving Boston the next morning. There were 15 people coming in. Everybody's Japanese. Nobody speaks English. They were all different ages. Nobody had ever had the Alexander work before. They didn't know why they were there. And I said, well, I'll just go around and work with them. And then I always say, what's your experience? And not what you feel like, but what's your experience? And then we go from there. So I work with two men, nothing remarkable. Then I come to a young woman, I guess 20 years old or something. And she was sitting, everybody's in Japan, they're sitting in a zazen posture, they're on their knees. I'm in a chair. And so she's sitting like that. And I work with her here, here, here for a minute and a half. And I say, what's your experience? And she says, I don't feel as though I should be hit. I said, what do you mean? She said, before you touched me, I've always felt as though I was a person who should be hit. I stepped back. I said, what are you talking about? She said, my parents beat me. I said, when you were a little girl? She said, no, now. I said, do you live with your parents? She said, yes. Now, this is the Alexander lesson. I stepped back. I said, are you aware that you're inviolate, that nobody has the right to hurt you or harm you? She says, I know that now, but I didn't know it until you touched me. So I smiled and I said, can you make me a promise? We've known each other for 3 minutes. 3-minute lesson. She says, yes. I said, when you feel safe enough, I want you to go to your parents and stand before them and say, I'm inviolate. Nobody has the right to hurt me or harm me, and you never had that right either. And if you ever harm me again, I'll leave and you'll never see me again. Will you harm me? I said, can you say that? She says, I can now. I left the next day. I came back the next year, and I'm hoping I'd see her. She comes in, two big poster boards, a translator, and a briefcase. She looked at me and said, sit down. I sat down. She takes out the first poster board. It's got 4 generations of families, deaths, births, marriages, everything, how many children they had. And she explains the violence in 4 generations. Her name was at the bottom of the poster board. She says, this was my family. I live here now. I kept my promise. I did exactly what you asked. I stood before my parents and said, I'm inviolate. Nobody has the right to hurt me or harm me. You didn't have that right. And if you ever harm me again, I'll leave. You'll never see me again. Will you harm me? And they said, yes. I left that night, stayed with a friend for a while, got a job, saved money, got an apartment. And then she pulled out the next poster board. There were clouds in the poster board, a whole big poster board filled with clouds, inside of which was a phrase. The first cloud said, I'm inviolate. Nobody has the right to hurt me or harm me. She said, I would meditate on this and something else would come to mind. I would write it in the clouds. I would meditate on that. I am my own woman now. That is your fault.
Oh my gosh.
That was that was one of the best Alexander lessons.
Yeah, it's what you said at the beginning. It's a rebirth.
It was she. I mean, when you touch a person, you're touching their entire being. And if they are touched in a way that lets them experience who they truly are and never deserve to be hit or hurt, it lasts forever. Oh, it can't.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, some people have gone too far. I've had those people too. And my other one was, I'll give you one more, Austria. So I always have a theme when I give a workshop. The theme was when you look at someone, well, you're looking from memory. I mean, looking is more memory than it is present time. Seeing is present. They both like that as well. And so I came up with a something that sounded like Rumi. When you put your hands on someone, say, I'll never try and know you. I will always long to see you. When you look at anyone, I'll never try and know you. I'll always long to see you. So I was in Austria and I said, who would like to try this out? Woman raises her hand. I said, what's your issue? And usually you're working with an unresolved issue. A person comes in and brings you an unresolved issue, and you guide them into resolution, how they do resolve it. She said, well, I don't like my husband and I don't like my children. I said, that's a problem. That's a problem. Why don't you like your children? Well, they're all over top of me. When I come home from work, I never have any time to myself. I have to just attend to what they want to do. I just don't like it. I said, how about the husband? He never touches me. Well, that's a problem. Okay, when you go home tonight, before you walk in, before you turn the doorknob, I want you to envision your children and then say to yourself, I'll never try and know you. I'll never try and know them. I'll always long to see them. In other words, you're withholding defining yourself. It's an inhibitive moment. You are in effect, because of the neuromuscular you and the nervous system that supports you, you are inhibiting and you are giving direction. You're letting your neck be free. When you say, I'll never try and know you, I'll always long to see you, you just let your neck be free unconsciously, because the brain knows that you're not going to look at your children in the same way. So the brain reorganizes you completely in the default mode network. So she comes back the next day and she said, it worked. I walked in and I saw that my children loved me. So we played together. We had a great time. I put them to bed, and that was it. I said, the husband next. Do the same thing. When you go home tonight, before you turn the doorknob, you go in, I want you to look and see your husband in your mind's eye and see him. Don't just look at him, because when you look at him, you're going to see who you remember. And you'll see what you feel about him. But say to yourself, I'll never try and know you. I will always long to see you. She comes back the next day, she's a big smile on her face. She says, it worked. I walked in after saying, I'll never try and know you, I'll always long to see you. That's why her neck was free. And I saw he was sad. So I said, why are you sad? He said, we don't spend any time together. And she said, well, you never touch me. He said, I thought you didn't want me to. So they talked and they went straight upstairs to the bedroom. So it's an inhibitive moment. I like the term withholding defining yourself, the way you customarily define yourself, which is an inhibitive moment. And then the brain steps in and reorganizes your awareness. And you are able to redefine what you previously defined in a different way. So that's just another story.
Yeah, that's really, the technique is so much more. You know, you have the choice. Given that many individuals are experiencing increased stress and anxiety due to contemporary life demands, what advice would you offer for cultivating body awareness and presence amidst these challenges?
There are two concepts that a person has to be introduced to. One is the concept of use. I use myself to be myself. You either use yourself in accord with the way you're designed to function or you don't. And when you do use yourself in accord with the way you're designed to function, it's healthier. It's easier. When you don't, you run into problems. And then there's the kinesthetic aspect. It begins with an awareness. The technique begins with an awareness that you previously didn't have. You have a kinesthetic awareness of how you're using yourself in a given moment to be yourself and respond to a given circumstance. And you can become very good at being who you already were. If you're an Olympic athlete, you might win the gold instead of the silver because you got better at using yourself. But it's impossible for me to separate use from self. The book is use of self. Use is the way you use yourself. Self is who you are. And when you're a child, I always talk about this. When you come into the world, this is not true if you come into the world in the middle of a war and your mother's on the battlefield dying while you're born. I mean, these things happen, and they're aberrations. So, but when you come into the planet, it's your birthday, the day of your birth. And most countries, not all, but a couple, I think Korea still does it. They count the moment you're here as your first birthday. So when you're 1 year old, you're really two. And but that's true because it's your birthday and you were given a gift. You were given a gift, and the gift is breath. You don't take a breath. There's an exchange of atmosphere. You are given breath, and you immediately give back carbon dioxide. So the moment you're born, you establish an interrelationship between yourself and the planet. You have no identity. You are your mother's breast. You are what you see. You are the air you breathe. And on some level, you are those things, on some level. But then you mature, you're still an evolving little creature. And you look up and you realize that you're not the other. You're not your mother's breast. You're not the air you breathe. You're not your tree. You're not, on some level, you say, who am I? And you start cultivating a sense of identity. Now, that identity is whatever family you grow up into, the country you grow up into, the milieu you grow up into, all of it affects who you become. But you do become who you are, and you develop patterns of use while you're doing that. So all those patterns of use are integral to who you are for yourself. So my emphasis is not on use, it's on self. Because you're going to live with yourself for the rest of your life. You may as well know who you are. and
Probably.
can be.
Yeah, yeah.
So if anything distinguishes the work that I do, I think that's my distinguishing factor. It doesn't mean that if somebody wants to play the guitar better, that you don't guide them into a better quality of use that allows them to play the guitar the way they want to. You still do that.
Mhm.
But if they're up for it, I prefer to go that other route.
To find out who you really are.
Well, I think that's why we're here,
Yes, yes.
you know? I started off on a tobacco farm, you know? I liked plowing behind a mule, actually. I thought it was fun. Uh, but it wasn't what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And I had an Alexander lesson. This is in my book too. I had an Alexander lesson without being a lesson that led me to leave my state of Virginia and led me to leave the life that I would have lived and became an actor. And it was 1960. I would have been 17. And we were all gathered in the high school in cars at a hamburger stand. You go and you order your hamburger, your hot dog, your Pepsi Cola, your whatever, and you come back in the car, you stand and you're waving to the person over there, but it's all everything that you expect. And you've lived a life of expectation. And you're all white. Everybody's white because I went to segregated schools. That's how old I am. Martin Luther King is just around the corner, 63. So two Carlo always, and it's really rowdy, very rowdy, very rowdy. And two carloads full of black women and children drive up. Now, in those days, if you were black, you could not be served. You drank separate water fountains, you went to separate bathrooms, etc. I know it's hard for you to see that, but I grew up with that. And you just kind of, well, this is the way it is. So they got out of their car and they walked up to the room and the serving stand, and you could see the guy do this. Now, the moment they walked up there to be served, the whole parking lot got totally quiet, stillness, no sound. And it had been rowdy, teenagers. So they did this twice. The server did this twice. So they turn in, and I'm watching the whole thing. And they turn and look at each other. They're sad. They are humiliated. They're not being treated like a human being. The children don't know what's going on. And they start to walk away. And one woman trips and falls on the pavement, and the whole parking lot starts laughing. And the women freeze, and the children freeze. They don't know what to do. And I started walking towards her. I don't know what moved me, but I started walking towards her and put my hand out. I said, "Take my hand." And the whole parking lot got quiet. And she didn't take my hand. I said, "Take my hand, please." And she took my hand. I lifted her off the pavement. I held her. We all walked over to their cars. They all got in their cars. The car doors went bam, 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 bam. And I opened the door in the back seat for her. I think it was the back seat. And I put her in. And we looked at each other just with wonder. Why? Why? And I closed the door and I watched them drive down the street. And then I was standing there and I realized that my back is to my high school and I can never go back. My back is to the life I lived in the South, but I can't go back. If I just did what I did, I don't belong here. That's an inhibitive moment. That was an Alexander lesson.
Mm.
I didn't know who I was. I had an identity, but it wasn't who I was if I just did what I did. And so then I had a walk later that year with the prom queen. I would carry her books home from school. I was madly in love with her, but she was with a college guy, so I had no chance. So I'd carry her book home. And she started crying. And I said, "Why are you crying?" I don't want to give her name. And she said, "I'm crying over David." this is okay, the name. I said, why are you crying over David? David's name was David Schreibfeder. And when I moved my senior year in high school, I went to another town. My father got a better job at Pepsi-Cola. And I drove a Pepsi-Cola truck. I still have my uniform. When I came to this new town, I hadn't read a book since I was 9 years old. Not in school. I read no books. Been 9 years old. And that's another story. And so the English teacher, Bob Goldman, everybody's Jewish. And is a pretty good, strong contingent of Jewish people at the school. And I had never known that before. And so Bob Goldman comes up to me with an armload full of books: Sinclair Lewis, Thomas Hardy, Return of the Native, Shakespeare, Samuel Pepys' Diary. He says, I've been watching you for a couple of weeks. You wasted your life. Read them. So I started reading all those books. They were crazy books to read, and it changed my life. So she's crying over David Schreibfeder. I said, why are you crying over David? He was a track team buddy. She said, well, he's not going to heaven. I said, what do you mean David's not going to heaven? Well, he's Jewish. And my whole world stopped. I thought about the black lady that I picked up. I thought about standing with my back to the high school, my past. I looked at the woman. I said, there's some things in this world you need never be concerned about. You just let God take care of them. And one of those things is whether or not David Schreibfeder makes it to heaven. I went home, looked at my mother, and I says, I'm leaving the state. Where are you going? I don't know. What will you do? I don't know. You're supposed to go to college. You paid your down payment. I'm not going. She says, well, I just read an article about the Pasadena Playhouse. You've been talking about acting. I said, that's where I go. In 3 months, I was in Pasadena. That parking lot, that hamburger stand was an Alexander lesson. It had the inhibitive moment. It had the withholding definition. It had all the earmarks of a kinesthetic recognition of your use.
Yeah, and a new direction.
A new direction in your life.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel blessed, actually. Been a tough life, but I feel blessed. I lost my wife. I'm not blessed by that, or 2 wives. But I have wonderful, wonderful children, and I love the students. So
with new generations coming into this practice, do you hope they will take away from your teachings?
Well, I'm biased. I hope they take away self. I think it's wonderful to use yourself more in accord with the way you're designed to function. Your life is easier. You do get better at who you already are. And if you are a thief, you get a better thief. But the other is better. The other is finding yourself at a given moment in ways you've never experienced yourself, which is the single most appropriate response you could possibly have come up with. It changes your life. And it changes the way you see others. And when the Elegant work first started, you were wrong for 3 years. That's what they said. You can never be right. You're wrong. When I was giving lessons at workshops at David Gorman's place, we used to go back and forth all the time. A woman came up to me and says, I never knew this had anything to do with my life. I've been teaching for 6 years. And then one woman came up to me and said, are you aware that you're teaching the feminine version of the Elegant work? And I went, hey, you're right. I said, you're right.
The giving birth part.
The giving birth part, that too. But she said, there's a woman in Alexander's lineage who wrote A Life of One's Own. I can't remember her name. I read it. A Life of One's Own, but she dealt with feeling. And the Alexander, when he was teaching you, if you cried, you went in the bathroom and cried and then came back out and worked. You didn't cry during the lesson.
Yeah, just do some whisper da.
Yeah,
This
yeah. I
helps for
also do the whispered
everything.
ah differently. So I hope the younger generation, well, we've got a very confused, chaotic, and dangerous world right now. You know, it's always been like that since the dawn of civilization, but we're really living through it a lot right now. We haven't lived through this in the last World War I and II. And this one's crazy. So I hope that the people that come along, the younger people that come along, bring a different kind of guidance. And I think something like the Alexander work could take hold in a different way. And it is with some of the teachers I know. Because I've taught in Europe and Asia, you know, for I don't know how many years. I forget. I started in 1987, I guess. Ever how many years that is.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen a lot of changes in the people that come for workshops. So I would hope that they contemporize this work to the societies that we live in today. We're not an Edwardian society at all. You know, it's the 21st century.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be what I would say.
And finally, if there's one key message or insights that you individual could take away regarding their body and identity through the lens of the Alexander technique, what would it be?
Jeremy Chance and I once had a little written exchange because I mentioned that he had mentioned to me that Marjorie Barstow said, "You're number one. You know, the teacher's number one." And I said, "Well, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that at all." He said, "Well, what do you think?" I said, "Well, I don't think the truth. The truth is what happens between the two of you." I said that earlier. And in the lessons that I've given, I don't give anybody a truth. Um, you touch their truth. Um, it's this morning in the training, we're talking about touch and be touched. My wife used to talk about that a lot. You can't really touch somebody until you allow yourself to be touched. And it's not about getting it right and doing it right. I think any truth is what happens between two people in a conversation, in the act of making love, in the act of sharing a dream, sharing an experience, whatever it may be. It's not about you and it's not about them. It's what happens between the two of you. I mean, in all probability, I'm making this up, but I'll bet it happened on many battlefields. And there have been lots of battlefields in this world that we live in. That two warriors probably looked at each other and getting ready to hack each other to death. And each of them probably looked at the other and realized how wrong that was. That you can't take another person's life. And they probably lay down their arms and walked away and never killed another person. So the truth is what happens between the two of you when you're both ready to encounter the other. You don't lose anything. And the truth in a lesson is what happens in the context of a lesson, not the truth that I give you. You need better use to be the person you want. It happened to me when I was 12. I'll conclude with a story. Growing up on the farm, I did all manner of, probably past life as Zen archer and things, but I was an archer, I was a hatchet thrower, I threw knives, I shot bullets, because you could do that then. It was all target practice, but more like a Zen archer. And I did Zen archery for a short time. So I was throwing pieces. I'm 12 years old. I'm throwing pieces of coal up in the air, and in those days you have a rifle. It's not like today's guns, but you have a rifle on the farm. And I would shoot the coal, and it would burst. And that's this. I mean, I love doing it. And then a bird flew over, and I just shot the bird, and the bird stopped in midair. And the moment I heard, and then it just dropped, dead, dropped, thud. And the moment I shot the bird, I heard the absence of its song. And I just realized that I'd taken the life of a creature for no reason. And I vowed that moment never, ever again to take the life of another creature. I never hunted after that. And I found a tree on the farm. It was snowing. And I'd sit all night long under the tree in the snow to atone for killing the bird. And again, I can't remember how it was, I don't know if it was anywhere from 4 days to a week or what, but I'd sneak out of my house, jump off the roof and go get under the tree and sit. I was meditating, didn't know it. And I discovered years later, of course, that the Native American would sit with their back against the tree to match cerebral spinal fluid with sap for healing. But what I was healing was myself, never to take the life of another creature. So even when I was drafted to go fight in Vietnam in 1966, I went down there. I was the only person there with a beard because I was doing a role on stage, and had long brown hair. And I flunked every single medical test they gave me, but nothing was wrong with me. I flunked the Army IQ exam. And when I left, they stamped my papers and said, the Army rejects you. And for a moment, I felt pangs of rejection. And then I said, wait a minute, what did you say? The Army rejects you. I clicked my heels up and down, got on the bus in Los Angeles and drove back to Santa Barbara. And since that time, birds have always been a messenger for me. They announce the death of a person. And but that one little instance, this is not me. You know that you are not the person who did what you just did, and you can never do it again. And that's an inhibition, and that is withholding definition. And one of the things because a lot of people don't really buy my withholding definition, but when you do go into neuroscience, the neurologist that I use, he and I are going to try to write a paper together. I don't know if we can do it, but the neuroscience uses the term withholding definition. When you make the choice not to define yourself in the way that you previously defined yourself at a given moment, given the circumstance, they say it's the default mode network where identity lies. And they use the word, you have withheld definition.
Interesting.
And I do believe that's what the inhibited moment does. Alexander withheld defining himself in the way that he defined himself that caused the problem on the stage.
Mm-hmm.
This is exactly what he did.
Yeah. That's
And
true.
when he
Yeah.
let his neck be free, he had no anatomy at all, as far as I know. He may have had some because he taught voice, but
But he had a good perception. He noticed his body. He was
yeah.
noticing what he's doing. He observed. He was curious. I think those,
Well, he asked the supreme question, going back to
yeah,
his doctor.
yeah.
He says, could it be that I might be using myself in such a way that I might be contributing to the loss of my voice?
He's close.
Yeah.
He was the closest of what I
19 years
heard.
old at the turn of the century, that's a big question to ask.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. How do you get to know Priska?
Priska,
Priska Gauger.
somebody told, I forget the names now, so long ago. While I was giving a lot of workshops for David Gorman in London, a woman she was American, married to a Swiss man. They lived in Zug. And she told Doris Dietsche that I spent a lot of time talking about feeling. And that was not talked about that much in the Alexander community at all.
Forbidden.
And so Doris brought me over. Let's see. And I was staying in Zug, and the workshop was in Zurich. And the woman who I was staying with, she said, my husband is an architect. Is there any articles you want to run off in his office before we go to, yeah. I said, yeah, sure, we can run these off. But I didn't know that she was going to make me wait. I was an hour and a half late for the workshop.
Oh,
When I arrived, and they were mad. They were mad at me, but there's nothing I could do. And it's the only workshop that I ever felt as though I had no control over it. So we started the workshop. And then after about 20 minutes, I said, are you all understanding what I'm saying? And they were, no. I said, well, we need a translator.
yes.
This is the old days. So I don't know who translated for me, but then I
Probably
got a
Rosa
translator.
Luisa.
It could have been Rosa Luisa. And Rosa Luisa, she and I became very dear friends. And she was a very dear friend of my wife. When my wife was ill, she said, I've been studying with a woman who has gone to all of the healing springs throughout Europe and taken water from each one and combined them for healing. Would you like to try that? My wife had cancer. And she said, would you like to try it? And Julie said, of course. But when are you going to come over? Rosa Luisa said, tomorrow. Rosa Luisa flew over and stayed for a day and a half, and then flew back and taught her the waters. And Damian, her husband, it wasn't they weren't married at the time.
Damian, yeah.
He had this, the I don't know what you call it, the tablets that he sells.
Yeah, yeah.
So he made Julie a special blend, but didn't work. And but that's when I met Rosa Luisa and Prishka. Who took me over there to work? Oh, and Jacqueline the Webster brought me,
Ah,
but
mhm.
she wasn't even there. She went off to meditate in India and never came back. So I gave the workshop for her, but she was never there. And that's when Andrea Studer,
Yeah.
who was probably 20 years old at the time, she took me there. And then Prishka and Andrea became very dear friends. And so that's how I met. I mean, I met a lot of people in Switzerland
Mhm.
because it's
Yeah,
been, yeah, 35, 36 years, I guess.
yeah, and probably you're coming to Switzerland someday.
I'll be endorsed in Germany in October.
Ah,
And
okay.
ATI is having their annual meeting outside of Frankfurt. So I'll be there. And I'll either go to Switzerland then or wait till next May.
Thank you so much, Tommy, for sharing your incredible insights and experiences with us today. And for those who are eager to deepen their understanding of the Alexander technique, I encourage you to contact with Tommy via social media. I think that's good for you, yes?
So it's
Or
either
rather
social
email.
media or they can write me and I'll put them on my mailing list at tommy@easeofbeing.com.
You're such an open-minded person. It's really nice to have met you and that we could have a talk together today. Thank you so much for showing up and sharing.
I hope to see you in Switzerland.
Yeah, hope so too.
Bye-bye.
To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. If you found this conversation inspiring and want to hear more enriching interviews like this one, be sure to follow the Ganz in Bewegung YouTube channel. Join us as we continue exploring insightful discussions that can help you on your path to personal growth and well-being. As we wrap up, remember this: the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Take that step today towards a more fulfilling life.